I've been actively engaged with my breath for about 6 months now. And I want to talk about the different aspects, or at least one of the different aspects that I discovered in breathwork. Um, there's a there's two aspects really that I find go together, but they are worked at individually, sort of in my mind, or how I go about connecting with the breath is sort of in two steps. There's how I connect to my breath from a technical perspective in my day to day. And so this is tied to my breathing through my nose. What is the rate of my breathing? Am I blocking my breath? Um, and so it starts in breath awareness, where you just get curious about your breath and about your breathing patterns, and you play with it through breathwork, where you consciously try to alter certain of the patterns of breath. And so that's one aspect. And I want to touch a little bit about that aspect. And it leads into the other aspect, is that as you interface technically with your breath differently, things start shifting emotionally and growth shows up. And so there's the everyday breath, which I call the functional breathing that we're doing all the time, that we interface with, or that I interfaced with differently over time as I started being more aware of how I was breathing. And even like as I'm talking, being conscious of my breath and staying connected with it. And so that rhythm of how I'm talking gets altered by the breath and brings presence into the moment. And so the interesting part for me was to notice through breath awareness and through different techniques of breathing. And so doing the Buteyko method, where when you're doing the Buteyko method, you're trying to take slow breath, and your certain exercises bring you to try to almost not move air as you're breathing through your nose. And so you're imagining that there's a flame under your nose, and you're breathing in such a small volume that the flame shouldn't be moving in what you're picturing. And the first time I did that exercise, that breath was so painful for me. I was unable to relax into it. I could feel how much tension there was, and I didn't know at the time, but it was my diaphragm. And I had to be really, really conscious of every movement of my diaphragm, and I couldn't relax at all. And so I kept exploring, because I was curious as to why is this so difficult. And when I asked other people who were doing the exercise, they didn't report that it was difficult for them in the way that it was hard for me. And so I kept at it. And as I kept doing it, I realized that when I exhaled, I was always holding tension in my diaphragm. I wasn't really letting go of my diaphragm. And the diaphragm is a muscle that relaxes on the exhale. And so when you exhale, you're actually relaxing the diaphragm, you're relaxing the tension a bit, as if you were lifting something that's in your hand. You're squeezing the muscle and you're using strength when you're lifting with your bicep, but as you let go of that tension, then that's when the weight goes back to the ground, if you want. And so the same thing happens with your diaphragm, where as you breathe in, that's when your muscle is tensing in, and then when you release, you just release that tension. But I was doing sort of a release that was more like a controlled release, where I was holding tension all the time, and that was tension that was in my body, that was in my nervous system, that was there at all times. And as I noticed that, and as I kept practicing this breath, I found a way, and my body found the way to relax into that breath and to be able to let go on the exhale. And that meant that I carried a lot less tension inside of me in my everyday. And so that made it easier to stay connected to my body. And that changes your experience of the world. And that's where the growth piece sort of comes in afterwards, where you start interfacing with your breath differently. And because emotions show up in the breath, well, so if you get stressed, your breath is going to get tense and you're going to take in smaller breaths. And so as I was interfacing with my breath differently, then emotions were moving differently inside of me. And those emotions and that release of tension, that release of emotion made space for other things and for me to listen. And that led to growth. And so as you progress into the breath and you technically get better or practice mindfully different breathing patterns, you're changing your life, you're changing the environment and how you perceive it, and that's changing your level of presence, and a lot of other things are moving with it. And that's not even going into conscious connected breath. This is just doing breathing techniques. And that was huge for me. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about that piece today, where just breathing, functional breathing techniques can really improve your day-to-day and can really help you get in touch with your body and what's going on inside of you.